Hello and welcome to the Space Madness podcast. Today I have a very interesting guest, Matthias Girod, based in Europe. And for longtime listeners, you'll note this is our first guest that's who is based in Europe. And I find that to be a really interesting detail right now, as there's a lot of interesting things going on scientifically in Europe, particularly during various changes going on around the world right now. Matthias is a consultant at a firm called Impact Bridge Advice, and I think a kindred spirit to me in many ways, as I am also a consultant and I also try to help people make their scientific dreams come true, not to put too fine a point on it. So, Matthias, if you could introduce yourself briefly, that would be great. And of course, we have Wednesday. My co-host is here for the interview.
Thank you very much. Pleased to meet you both. And also thank you very much, Jeff, for having me. Yeah, I'm Matthias. I am based in Europe. I'm based in France, in Strasbourg to be precise, which is sort of half France, half Germany. Changed, I think, every 25 years in the past couple of the past century. Yeah, I am an independent consultant. I'm working on fundraising. I'm working on science policy, science diplomacy, and lately also I'm advising US scientists who are considering continuing or basically like finding a career in Europe. And this is how I met Jeff. And that's so short about me.
I thank you, and I think that's very diplomatically put. Certainly speaks to your experience and the world that you find yourself in. So, as I like to do with my guests, you have an advanced education in chemistry, and I'm interested in starting, way back. Where'd you grow up? What were the experiences that led you to that education? Because obviously that was part of how you got to be at the crossroads today, sort of the U.S. and Europe.
I mean, I'm German, so living in France currently, but I am German, born and raised. I'm coming from a really small town in the very north of Germany, close to the Dutch border and to the North Sea coast. So I basically grew up in a border area, and that is actually also a little bit a red line that goes to my through my life. So I went to high school there in German gymnasium, and it's quite interesting because when you are in Germany in school, you can choose to a certain degree what kind of subjects you want to basically graduate in, and chemistry wasn't one of them. So I got rid of chemistry as fast as possible, but then I had to do compulsory military service at that time. So I spent some time at the army and the navy, to be precise. So I was really thinking, also using that time to see what can I do and what do I want to do. Then my interest in chemistry came back because chemistry is one of those sciences where you can have a very nice half knowledge about almost everything. So you study chemistry and you understand a lot of things that are going on into your body and in your body and in plants and so on and so forth. On the other side, you are also doing some physics. So even you are not going fully deep in all these quantum things, or so you know how the things work with atom and molecules, and you basically can understand how a plasma TV works and also how an antibiotic work and also how plants are produced, or basically how rocks work and how I don't know, an iron alloy or something like that work. So this was at that time because I also didn't know, and the thing was as well, since I got rid of chemistry very very early in my school life, I didn't have any negative experience. So I didn't have bad exams there. So I said, okay, let's give it a try. So I gave it a try. I have to say it was a bit hard in the beginning because I had to learn a lot of stuff that other people did when they did their high school degree in chemistry. But in the end, I succeeded, and I really didn't regret it because it is really a very nice subject. And I stayed also on these borderline things because I started to do my master thesis actually in geochemistry. So it's it's a field between geology and chemistry. I was working on gas hydrates, kinetics. So I was basically looking at these geological substances from a chemical perspective. So I was working at
Mm,
the German Center for Geosciences. All around me were all geologists and geophysicists and so on, and I was the only chemist.
mm,
But it was really, really interesting. From there, yeah, I worked a little bit as a researcher there.
mm,
And this was also because it was a Helmholtz Institute. We had collaborations with the US, for example. We were working
mm.
with the USGS in
Uh,
Menlo Park. Yes, we were working with the
okay,
USGS
great.
in Menlo Park. And my project was partly financed by the German BASF company and Chevron in California. So it was yes.
Okay. Yeah, it comes back to oil.
Yes, it all comes back to oil. It was at that
Yeah.
time it was these gas hydrates were really, really, really a big hype because on one
Hmm,
side they seemed that they had a big impact on climate because all the
mm,
permafrost in Canada and in Russia and in Scandinavia is full of it, and the people were
mm,
really afraid when this whole thing starts to melt that there were
mm,
a lot of methane released into the air and the atmosphere.
mm,
But on the other side, and that was basically the interest of BASF and Chevron, was that
mm,
once they started to pump gas out of deeper depths in the ocean, these
mm.
gas hydrates form naturally within the stream of natural gas coming from the reservoirs and block the
Oh,
pipelines. So that was flow assurance, basically. That was
okay.
the interesting part.
Sort of like a kidney stone in the
Yeah,
pipeline.
exactly. Exactly. And as you can imagine, I mean, if you get them up from the Gulf of Mexico or someone from the Barents Sea, it's not so easy to just
Mm,
dive down there, open the
right.
pipeline, get them out, and
Yeah.
so they were very interested in the thermodynamic studies that we were doing.
Interesting. So I want to pause you for a second because I don't think I found out before in our previous calls. What town are you from
It's
in the small?
the town is called Leer. It is
Okay.
really, and it's basically like 5 kilometers from the Dutch border. I mean, it's really
Okay. Okay.
when I went and running as a teenager, my 5 kilometers run, I really basically ran to the border and back. So
Okay.
it was really, really close to.
Okay. Now, the real test of a town is, does it have its own subreddit page? Because
No,
if it does, then it's a town. No. Okay. Okay. So it's really small. Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. I find it very entertaining how that's become a sort of global measure of sophistication. Okay, so I really like your story there because you say a lot that I think is universally approachable, which is that you had a curiosity about the world, and luckily you started chemistry later than most people, which let you avoid a lot of high school, secondary school trouble. And actually, I can relate because for me, my high school chemistry class really is the reason my chemistry knowledge was my weakest subject until I really tried to work on it at NASA and learn so I could be more useful. But yeah, I think my it never killed my interest, but it really did not help my knowledge. And I think that's a theme I like to talk about is people and their perspective in education. Of course, it's a tragedy whenever someone loses their curiosity because of a poor educational experience. So very interesting stuff. And going to work for a petro company is a common story for chemistry graduates everywhere globally. So yet another thing brings the world together. So I'm curious, at what point in your career did you start to think about the bigger picture, the diplomacy, international relationships, stuff like that?
I was basically I noticed that I liked the project management work, and I noticed
Mm,
while I was really working with the colleagues in the US, also in Canada in the end, because I mean
mm,
the gas hydrate community at that part was a small community, mainly based in Northern America, but also with,
mm,
with some offsprings in Europe, and I liked
mm,
to do this work. I noticed this was for the first time that I really noticed that, for example, what I'm always saying is that many people that never worked in an international environment, they think that, for example, Americans are just Germans who speak English or vice versa. Yes.
okay.
So,
Okay.
they're all
Sure.
Western culture and so on and so forth. But
Right.
I found
Right.
that very interesting to experience the different approaches, the different ways of working, and that even highly educated people on both sides were basically stumbling in a meeting just because the approaches was just different.
Mm.
And so I really also had the wish. I mean, at that time I didn't have family ties. I was not in a relationship, and I was thinking like, you know what, it would be nice to go abroad for a little while,
Mm.
just a little bit, finding something.
Mm.
So I actually left the German Center for Geosciences and I started working in Italy.
Hmm.
Yes, so it was. I saw a position that that was working roughly in the same parts as a scientist
Mm.
in Trieste, another
Mm.
border area. I don't know if you are
Yeah.
familiar, but Trieste is really basically on the very far end of Italy, directly across
Mm.
to the border to Slovenia and Austria.
Okay.
So it's really, again, an interesting border area with an interesting history. And
Mm.
there I really learned that I was really interested, that what drives me more was actually
Mm.
the way how science is performed, especially in an international.
Mm.
Then that was more interesting than the work in the lab itself.
Sure.
And and then was my time when I said, okay, I want to do more of that stuff. So I really
Mm.
transitioned into science management. I left the lab
Okay.
and I got the opportunity, and that was very interesting because there was a new European thing that they founded, which is a research infrastructure consortium, which is really
Mm.
an institutionalized consortium out of several research institutions in different countries that
Mm.
working together, coordinating their research and so on. And they
Mm.
hired me there as a project and policy officer, and that also
Mm.
exposed me to the European Union and its funding mechanisms. And
Okay.
it was really then I really dipped into
Mm.
internationalization, international research management, and then I found out, okay, that's what you want to do. This is really what you.
So yet another thing we have in common. I mean, I didn't start in the lab, but I had the opportunity, quite gratefully, to work on issues of American policy regarding radioisotope power systems.
Hmm.
And so it was about figuring out mission needs for this material that's used for generating power in space. But of course, that goes right up to the federal government with, and really beyond into even international agreements. The complicated policies regarding the production and storage and usage of this material. So again, I really can relate exactly, because coming from a legal background, suddenly my understanding of the federal government and the way the agencies work became directly relevant. So it was a great coincidence. Okay, so then you went to Italy again in the border region. I mean, was that a coincidence, or did that appeal to you
It
at
was
the international scale?
it was a coincidence, but in the end, I must admit that really somehow it works for me. I like it. I
Mm,
really like
mm,
it, these things, because I grew up in a border region, and it's like, I mean, it's you get these interesting mixtures, right? I mean, you
yes.
get these interesting mixtures, and you have these people that are forming their own identity. They are not the one, and but also not completely
Mm.
the other, and this makes
Well,
very interesting. Yeah.
and anywhere there's a border, the people have to deal with constant reminders of different systems, right?
Yes, exactly.
In state borders in the U.S. or anywhere, if you live in the middle of a country or a state, you may never have to deal with it and never think about it. But particularly in Europe, I imagine, at least historically, which I'm more familiar with, you had constantly changing border lines and crossing. Both in my family alone, on both sides of my family, you have countless stories of, border crossings and so on. So I can see how that adds another layer of intrigue almost. And it's like how we all have the same rules of chemistry, right? We all have the same rules of laws of physics. But to make progress as humanity, we have to deal with these man-made, human-made systems that, at their best, they encourage and they advance human creativity, certainly at the opposite, create obstacles and so on. So curious, as you began to understand the European system, and I know mostly about ESA. I don't know how Europe manages other kinds of science projects. Actually, that would be a great segue. How does that work over there?
Well, I mean, yeah. How does it manage? I think
Yes.
I think it mainly administers, and I think that's the only way how you can manage something
Okay.
like the EU, because you really have so many different cultures in the end, you know, also work cultures as well, but also different
Mm,
approaches to things, right?
mm,
So it is really, I mean, it's somewhat of a miracle that it works so somehow, but I think it's really a kind of an administration. So they really try to make the rules as clear
mm,
as possible, and try to really look at all sides, which makes things incredibly complex. Also,
mm.
the interesting thing is, in the end, it very often comes down to personal relationships and the person that is sitting on the other side. So you see
Okay.
that really when you work on European projects, they are very, very prescriptive. You think you're always
Mm,
standing with one leg in the jail, or at least somewhere to
mm.
give back the money or something like that. But in the end, you also have usually a human being on the other, your project officer, basically on the in the commission, that is working in Brussels, and that's the person you can talk to.
Okay. Okay. So my next question, I think you just partially answered it, which is there a National Science Foundation equivalent at the European Union level? Okay.
That
Now
is
I'm aware that in the European Space Agency, there's sort of an expectation that the money that goes to the space agency will be from each nation. We return back to each nation in the form of work, which is one way of doing things. Is it similarly at the basic science level with the EU?
Yes, it is. It
Okay.
is, and there is also like it is an expectation. It is not always met, and that is also a constant point of critics, because you see the EU has to balance scientific excellence
Mm-hmm.
with inclusion. I mean, that's exactly what you
Mm-hmm.
say. I mean, when you basically have a country, I mean, some countries, of course, pay more, some pay less according to their GDP, economic strength, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, it's also everyone pays something, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the end, it's very important that you have very strong research countries, like, of course, the big players, Italy, France, Germany. Then you have the Nordic countries, but there are also then some smaller countries, and
Mm-hmm.
the newer countries that joined the EU later, that are sometimes not getting that much money back in form of research grants.
You
And
make You bring up something very interesting. You said, countries that join the EU later. So while you were talking, I was imagining the situation in the United States where you have universities kind of competing with each other for federal resources on a number of different levels, whether it's state policy. For example, where I live here in Georgia, the state is very supportive of the major research universities because of the industry that's located here. Now, so this was starting to sound very familiar until you said when the countries join the EU. Now, here in the US, I don't think, even in all of our political problems, I don't think anyone cares when each state joined the union, right? We've had, what was the last state? Hawaii in the 50s, I think. So that the timing is not relevant. I'm curious if you could give perspective. I've never heard this before, and I'm sure most of my listeners haven't. How does that play out in Europe with the countries joining the EU at different times? Because I've never even thought of that.
I mean, it plays a big role. I mean, you have basically, I could say, the core countries that formed the
Mm-hmm.
EU. I mean, that started
Mm-hmm.
with really this economic coal and
Mm-hmm.
steel
Okay.
community, that are basically really Germany, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg,
Mm-hmm.
then Italy. So really, basically the middle
Mm-hmm.
column of
Okay.
Europe, and then Spain and so on joined. And there was a long time nothing. And then when
Mm-hmm.
the Iron Curtain broke down, you had
Mm-hmm.
suddenly, and the Soviet Union fell apart. You had suddenly a lot of countries that are definitely culturally European. And
Mm-hmm.
where then, of course, they said, like, okay, we have to integrate them somehow. And then there were basically two waves of enlargement. One
Mm-hmm.
was 2004, 2005, so it's also now 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The last one was then 2014, I think. So for example, when Croatia joined, Croatia and
Mm-hmm.
Bulgaria, I think, but I'm not sure, but definitely Croatia.
Mm-hmm.
So you have in several stages, and that that brings a lot of things, because basically they joined. That means
Mm,
already a system in place, and they joined. And then you have to also see that they were coming from a communist system before that.
mm,
So in the end, they had 10 years to prepare. But what is 10 years for a cultural change? I mean, that's like,
yeah,
you can
nothing.
put
Yeah.
laws in place, you can put policies in place, but
Right.
what is it, as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right?
Yeah.
It's these things. So you have people
Mm,
also in charge in research. They are not bad scientists, but they just grew
right.
up in a different research funding and performing
Right.
system. And
Mm,
there was also, of course, the economical strength. So basically, they had to adapt to a system that was devised by countries like France, Germany, Italy, Sweden.
mm,
So, and that is still visible, and you also see that.
interesting.
And there is also, of course, a level of investment, because these countries still, they are catching up, they are growing, their economy is strengthened.
Mm,
But I mean, what in the end also there, what is 20 years? Not much,
right.
right?
Right.
Their standards of life, and also their standards of science is increasing.
Mm,
But nevertheless,
mm,
these things where you have strong players like the Max Planck Society and so on, they can invest.
mm,
They have whole project offices that are applying for
right.
grants, while the Eastern universities very often don't have that. So,
Sure.
so that's
Interesting. And then you have, so this is again similar to some issues in the United States where there's a there's a catch-22 vicious cycle problem where places don't have the opportunity to grow, and so they don't grow, and so they're not
yeah,
big. And yeah, and so many of one of the things I learned in the Midwest, where I lived for 2 years, was a great number of the United States universities were founded as agricultural universities in the 19th century to literally figure out how to not starve. And they built enormous programs for 100 years, ultimately leading up to feeding half of Europe in World War II.
yeah,
Like in Wisconsin, for example, where I lived, and that's the only reason I know this, something like half the dairy that was consumed by the entire Allied Army and half the countries of Europe in World War II was produced in Wisconsin, in the one small state. You have this agricultural production, this agricultural focus for 150 years, and now that's really not not the way to compete on the global scale anymore. So it's an interesting situation to hear. Now would you say there's, I don't want to use the word prejudice or old conflicts between these new and older European countries? Does that also come up? How would you talk about that?
I mean, it is there. I mean,
Mm,
we can be honest here. I mean, it's there, and
mm,
there's still, I mean, you have excellent science in there, and also there that
mm,
there is, of course, the system was a little bit the same, because their institutions were much more specialized. In the communist system, there was a planned system, so the state decided what was
I
needed
see.
and says like,
Right.
okay, so you are now becoming a mining university, and you are becoming an agricultural university. So
Okay.
basically that was how it went. This is also where a lot of not for all of them, but it
Mm,
was very often. So, and also there are prejudices. They of course faced a huge brain drain. So that means
mm,
that when they joined the EU, and there was the freedom, the free movement of workers and so
mm,
on, of course, what they did was, when they were good, they moved to a Western university. I'm saying it now because
yeah.
it was just much higher reputation, much
Mm.
more chances on the labor market, and so on and so forth.
Well, and presumably better places to live.
Better places to live,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there are still many prejudices. Some of them are true. I must say that. I mean, I worked
Mm,
with these universities a lot, and
mm,
during my time at the Central Eastern European Research Infrastructure
mm,
Consortium, where we had partners in the Czech Republic and so on. And it is different, especially when you have this, let's say, flat hierarchies that you very often have in
mm,
research. It's much more formal. So you need official
mm.
instructions from professors and so on and so forth. It's changing. There is a completely new generation coming, but the prejudices need to change as well. So the thing
Yeah.
is that it's if I'm also a researcher let's say from Germany, it is
Mm.
it's not your first thing that comes to mind when you're looking for a career abroad, or for a sabbatical, or for a
Mm,
research semester abroad, to Prague, or to go to Poland, or to go
I
to
see.
Ljubljana. You are more going to Sorbonne, to Oxford, to
Sure.
Bologna, this is
Yeah.
Stockholm, or something like that. So although it's getting less and less, it's getting less and less.
Mm,
The other side, you have, of course, as you say as well, you have this fatigue also on the side of the
mm,
universities, that basically very often say, but why should we bother spending hours and hours in preparing for a grant when our chance
mm.
is very low to get it? So I rather work with the money that I have,
Yeah.
and
Interesting. So one of the things I find curious about Europe historically is, there's much more openness about these conflicts and prejudices, right? I think a lot of Americans would not have been as open as you just were because it's just a more taboo subject here. Um, so I appreciate that, and it's important to acknowledge reality, right? Which is why, you know, what's really what science is for. Um, so, um, I'm curious how, suppose you're a young researcher in, let's say, Prague, or a college student. How does someone like that chart a course with a research career? Would they? Well, what do you think?
I think it is changing. If you are now a young researcher really being in Prague, Prague is, for
Mm,
example, one of the big winners. I mean, it's really getting going up. I mean, usually it's always good to have an on your resume, right?
mm,
So they are looking still for going to the West. Also, going to the
mm,
US was also always very prestigious. Of course, and I think it's still very prestigious. Many people are just afraid what happens.
mm,
But and I have to say, and this is what makes me hopeful, is that many of them are actually thinking of going back afterwards. So that they are basically saying like, yes, I'm going abroad, I'm getting my
mm,
names on, or the big names on the, and also some things. Many of them are, especially for countries like Poland, they are
mm,
very proud of where they are coming from, and they are very proud of
mm,
their country has achieved after they got rid of communism. And they say, many of them say like, yes, I'm going here, I'm making the contacts, I'm learning, but then
mm,
I'm going back,
mm,
and work on these things, and try to basically make Poland even better, for economically stronger, and
mm,
so on. So, but still, of course, there is this very strong pull to the big names.
mm. Interesting. Yeah, I think that here in the U.S. that's fairly similar. I think that because you have, well, we could compare Europe and the US all day, but I'm just thinking about the 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 level of national pride, I think at the nation level in Europe is different than the states here, right? Where in the universities I think are split up in subject matter here in such a way, like I said, it's unlikely someone would go to MIT for physics and then go back to Oklahoma for the for the nostalgic and emotional purpose of growing Oklahoma State University, for example. I'm just making these up. So perhaps just a curiosity of mine in the 500 years of history between the United States and its colon prior to the United States and Europe. So I'm curious if you could tell me if we could kind of connect to the present. What kinds of organization do you work with now? What challenges are they facing? Stuff like that, whatever you can share.
I'm actually working a lot with smaller universities, so basically that also try to get a piece of the cake, mainly in Europe. There are I mean, a lot of specialized universities, economic universities,
Mm,
that are also basically not having the big names, but many of
mm,
them are thinking like, okay, so let's try it with a European funding, let's say. So this is what I'm mainly working with, and because they are not used to work. I mean, many of these smaller ones, as you say, like you could really smaller ones, they are regional. They are there for basically serving the regional ecosystem,
mm,
and
mm,
they don't even think really. internationally, and you feel that
Mm,
basically every step of the way. So you are going
uh,
there. It starts even with the fact that, I don't know, let's say the procurement office doesn't really speak English,
okay.
which is a problem when you are getting a student from the US or from somewhere else and
Mm,
he needs to order his chemicals.
sure.
That's the first thing. But I basically help them in working and navigating these things. And there also, I'm working a lot with really these intercultural trainings as well. As I said, someone who never stepped abroad, who never went somewhere, basically just did perfectly fine life in a small
Mm,
university, maybe moved within Germany or so, but really
mm,
thinks like, look, I mean, the French are just Germans who speak French, but no, they are not. I mean, it's like,
sure.
there are different working cultures, there are different
Mm,
negotiation cultures and so on. And I'm also trying to help them setting up governance structure, which is very important in
mm,
international collaborations.
yeah.
Effective governing structures that basically are inclusive,
Interesting.
that are so. These are mainly the ones that I'm currently working with. I mean, if you have big institutions, Heidelberg, Sorbonne, Oxford,
Mm,
I mean, they are international by default. This is just,
yes.
they don't need me. Let's put it like this.
Sure. Well, I can relate. I can relate absolutely. I mean, what I find with large universities here is actually now they're closing off a little bit.
Mhm.
So I'm finding that I'm asking questions and trying to bring people together, and people are responsive. I think because the what's going on in the U.S. domestically is making large institutions more cautious. So I'm getting more emails back than I used to because I'm a I'm an unknown, and what they do know is makes them feel careful. Makes them feel cautious. So it's interesting. It's interesting times, and I can see how the international training part. I can see how it's a logical extension of what you've done, and how you can kind of show up at the border somewhere in a sense, literally or not, and bridge the communities, which itself then have to reach up above all of you to the EU itself. So very interesting. And again, I feel like if you were here, you'd do what I do. And if I was there, I'd do what you do, because we really have, yeah, very, very interesting. So, actually, I'm curious about how the United Kingdom not being part of the EU, how does that fit into all of this, and the Scandinavian countries that are not? It's just not a comparison we have here in the U.S.
It's there are two distinct cases. I mean, like for example, the Scandinavians, the Norwegians, yes, they are not part of the EU, but it feels like if they were. I mean, to be very honest,
Okay,
they are
I
very
see.
open for collaboration. Yes, of course, it's the political thing that they don't want to join, but it's okay. But they are
Mm,
basically accepting everything that is
hmm,
the EU is basically offering them, and they are offering the same thing back. So
hmm,
it's a really a mutual relationship, right? So there are
okay,
some little quirks. For example, they cannot be the coordinator of a project for legal reasons. So that means the coordinator is really the one that is so the risk, and they are the one that are dealing directly with the Commission. And only
hmm,
institutions from full member countries can be
I
the
see.
coordinator, because they are also, because the Commission makes sure that all the legislation that they are proposing are implemented there. So that means
Okay,
just the legal, it's not that they are not capable or so, but it just gives them just the legal thing that they can drag everyone to court when they are doing something
sure,
without
sure,
any international problems or so. So that really applies to, for example, Norway, Iceland, and these things.
I see. Okay,
The UK and Switzerland are a little bit of different animals.
okay,
I feel that, for example, the research community feels very, very, very strongly connected to Europe. So
hmm,
they see themselves a little bit of their own class, but they are still connected to Europe. I mean, there are
okay,
long-standing relationships and so on and so forth. And I think the UK tries to be also a bridge, because they also,
hmm,
of course, for historical reasons, for language and cultural reasons, also very much connected to the US.
sure.
So they are
Well, they want the best. They want it both ways, right? Basically, Yeah.
Yeah, you see,
Okay.
the polite way of saying is like they are trying to be a
Yeah.
bridge, but
Right.
they want
Right.
it both way. It's really like
Yeah.
it's really like that. They are trying to play that. We will see how that plays out.
Mm.
I have the feeling that it might backfire, but that's just my personal opinion because I mean it's really getting a bit, Europe tries to become more sovereign and so on, to be
Mm.
less depending and so on. So and of course they try to include for geographical part more the UK.
Mm.
I think there will be some discussions in the future to see how they will
Interesting.
play out. And that's my it's a
Okay.
gut feeling. I don't have any, but
Sure.
this is
So I'm curious where you would remark about Switzerland, because I'm involved in a course at ETH Zurich with some of my NASA work, and every single day this week, someone else that I used to know at NASA JPL has gone to Switzerland. So that may just be my small N, but certainly seems like a trend.
I mean, Switzerland. I can only congratulate them. Switzerland is really a great country. It's really like Switzerland is very much. I mean, they like themselves in this role of being neutral. How neutral they really are is always a question, but they like these things, and they also don't like that someone
Mm.
tells them how to do things. Right. On the
Mm.
other side, of course, there are, especially of course because of their language. I mean, they have these four, but basically three languages. I mean, they speak German, French, and Italy.
Mm.
They are also a little bit of a bridge thing in the middle of Europe between
I see.
Europe's three biggest economies and also being a considerably large economy themselves.
Yeah.
So they are trying to balance their I do it my way. They
Yeah.
know that they need. I mean, they cannot
Mm.
survive alone, right? I mean, they can survive,
Mm.
maybe, but they cannot thrive alone. They need
Right. They got all those tunnels and castles underground.
exactly. They need the trade, they need
Yeah.
the exchange, and
Hmm.
they need the relationships. And I think it's that also they live from it. I mean, the ETH, I mean, when
Sure.
you can go to the ETH or the EFPL, those are top addresses and with the absolute right, I mean, they are doing great science there. And so
Yeah.
this is a thing that they really want to. But
Hmm.
yeah, they are also fighting a bit with not with themselves, but they try to balance their ideas of
Sure.
we do it my way, the Swiss way.
Mhm.
But when we want to do something, we need to accept that the EU is sometimes telling us how they want things done.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting comparing that model with the EU with the United States and its current challenges. So where do you think the EU goes in the next 10 years? How do you think your work changes as we come to a close of our episode?
Uh, well, I think my work will change in a sense that I will have to work less with the US, maybe more with Canada,
Mm.
Australia, and with South America. So I should be polishing my
Interesting.
Spanish, maybe. I think I think this is and also basically with Japan, and I think the
Mm.
EU will try to take part of the role that the US has now, right? I mean, it's basically of this basically also this thing of the reliable big bloc
Yeah.
of also
Hmm.
rich bloc in the end, that is trying to hold up the scientific rigor and values and so on
Yeah.
and so forth.
And do you see that in your colleagues and your daily? Is this just transparently obvious to everyone over there in France and Germany right now? I mean,
No, I
we're
don't.
struggling here. Oh no, you don't think?
I don't think so.
Okay,
I mean, still, the US science system is in so many things really still a huge role model, and many for now the EU is also not yet ready to basically replace that.
interesting. Okay,
And I think it takes time, and it might also be that I don't know what comes after your next election. and
Mm,
how far the things go back to where they were, or basically just on a basically on a different level.
mm,
I think there's also a lot of hope that, I mean, everyone thinks that probably after these 4 years, and who knows what happens afterwards, the US will have changed. I mean, those
mm,
will have, and the EU will have changed as well. So many, I
mm,
think, hope for a bit of a more leveled relationship.
mm,
But I think that many people still don't, including myself. I mean, I'm talking
mm,
to US colleagues, and when I'm hearing
mm,
what happened there when public funds were cut and so on and so forth,
mm,
I honestly, I was also thinking, like, I mean, this is not true. I mean, this is a joke, guys. Really, this is like,
mm,
even for me, it's a thing that is. I mean, yeah, that is basically working. That is very strange. And I think for many of them are longer standing professors, have personal relationships to professors in the US, maybe
mm.
having been them professors in the US themselves, and say, like, this is somehow a little
Yeah.
thinkable, right? But it's the reality.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting that so I write about the layoffs at NASA a lot. That's sort of my lane, so to speak. And I was interviewed twice this week by once by the London Times and another outfit in Europe that I can't remember at the moment. But I find it interesting. And again, I'm just one person, but it must be quite a strange thing over there to see the United States, as I describe it, just putting down our leadership role and saying, yeah, we're not going to do this. But actually, we do need to come to a close here, but I think there's a subject that we could talk about in another episode, which is the extent to which here in the U.S., I think that the potential for startup companies and entrepreneurship to scale up scientific research as a major engine of the economy, which is certainly a big subject right now. Why don't we talk about that another time? I'm curious how people in Europe feel about that, and I think that would be a subject that would be worth a longer discussion.
Sure, because I still think that is basically still the weak point of Europe in the
Oh,
end.
interesting. Okay.
That's like, it's just a different, and also many countries struggling, including my own home country,
Mm,
Germany, which is really, yeah. And I think, I mean, that would be a really interesting discussion, because
mm.
this will be also the hardest thing to basically to replace the US. I mean, next to, of course, the military kind of things. But
Well, I thought you were going to say the hardest cultural change.
oh, the hardest cultural change as well, because one
Yeah,
goes with the other.
yeah. Right,
Like,
right.
because it's not that it's just the mindset is just a different thing, and it's
Yeah.
it's not done with just, ach, yet now we are doing just another fund that funds something.
Hmm.
There is a deeper cultural thing there,
Yeah.
and it's also
Well,
very
I think
interesting. Yeah, I think
I think
that's
that's
really
a
a little
great
bit.
that's a great subject for another episode. We'll get to talk about European history and cultural differences, the U.S. and Europe. But for now, I want to thank you very much for joining me. I think this was I certainly found this really interesting. I hope the listeners do. And with that, I'll say thank you for joining me on the Space Madness podcast. Hope you have a great evening and weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks again for the invitation, and yeah, a good weekend to you too, and the rest of the working day.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.